We're in Zeb Winslow farm here at Scotland Neck, North Carolina in Halifax County. And we're standing in Zeb's cotton. And Zeb, why don't you just give us a little background on what this is and how you planted it, and a little information about the cover crop we're going to be looking at, and maybe a little bit about how long you've been practicing soil health management system. Kind of give folks an idea about like that.
Okay, I mean this is pretty much a normal cotton crop for us. It was planted into a 6-way blend of rye, triticale, oats, woolly pod vetch, crimson clover, and rape. And basically we let it grow until a day or so before we were going to plant into it. This actually, to help with some of our cotton and getting it in the ground, getting the seed to soil contact that we like, we actually came in and killed out about an 8-inch strip with herbicide in late March, early April. Let the middles continue to grow. That way we were able to come in and plant into a little bit less residue than what we normally do. Came in, planted the cotton into it, or rolled the cover down, planted the cotton into it, and then chemically terminated right behind the planter.
Okay.
So that's pretty much, you know, where we started.
So give me an idea how tall this was when you were planting it, this cover crop.
When we came in, the cover crop was probably about chest high, you know, 5.5 feet tall out here. We've chased high biomass cover crops above ground. We started this is probably our 6th year using, our 6th season using multi-species blends. And over those 6 years, I've tried to get more and more above ground growth.
Get more confident to be able to plant into that?
I think so, and the last 2 years I think have really taught me that I don't need as much biomass above ground as what we've had. I think the roots are a lot more important than what we're seeing above ground, so we're starting to scale back some of our mixes, planting a little bit less seed, just really concentrating on the root systems and diversity rather than something that's going to grow a 6 or an 8 foot tall cover crop.
Good diversity, because kind of what mirrors above ground is taking place below ground with your root system. You got different formations, you got fibrous roots, tap roots, and that different depths, and you're trying to mimic that.
Yes, sir. And I think through focusing more on diversity and different types of roots and less on the size and the amount of biomass that we're building, I think we can see the same benefits, and I think it'll make it easier for us to get in and plant into it as well.
I mean, before we start into the topic of the day, you talk about cutting back on your seed. How many pounds of seed you've been using?
We started in the high 40 to low 50 pound per acre range. I think there are places that folks probably could do that. I think we can do the same now, looking at something that's in the high 30 pound range maybe, is what we're gonna try and play around with some different seeding rates this winter when we come back in. But something that'll cut back the amount of seed that we're putting, you know, per square foot or per acre, and also help to cut back on our headaches when we plant, and also cut back on the cost of our cover crop as well.
What we want to do is just take a look at some things. There are a number of tests that you can send in, but I don't know how many times you want to spend $150 to do that. So as my understanding, farmers are a little frugal. So
yes, sir.
What can you do, and I'm just curious as we talk about this, what observations you make as we're looking at various aspects of the soil or soil health. You can go on the Soil Health Institute. We put together a little cards that kind of gives you some visuals and some using our senses, you know, our sight, our touch, and even our smell in some cases to evaluate soil health. So what we want to do is walk folks through that kind of thing. And one of the first things you can do is sit in your pickup truck and evaluate soil health after a rainstorm. And that's pretty critical because, I don't know, does water pond on your field?
Not nearly as much as it used to.
Okay. You ever wonder why that was?
Well, I hope now it's because we're actually keeping the water in the soil and keeping it on our field or in our field, as opposed to on our field and it's running off and ending up in a ditch somewhere.
That's exactly right. You know, as soil functions, one of the functions of soil is to let water infiltrate, move down through that soil profile, let it be held onto within the pore space. So one thing you can do is, as you know, after the next big rain, go out and farmers can look at their field, and if your field doesn't have water ponded in it, but your neighbor's field does, then that's a good indicator that there's something wrong with the soil function there. It's not necessarily working like it should.
Yes.
You know, probably again, we talk about disturbance and a lot of degrading the soil. You break soil particles up, and they don't necessarily move off the field, but they'll move down through that soil profile and they'll plug up those pore spaces. But that's a pretty simple one, you know. And even someone like myself makes you wonder, okay, what can I do that to improve that soil functions? First thing I like to do is look at the surface of the soil and if there's residue there or not. And that's a pretty key indicator. In our CS, you know, when we had highly erodible land, I don't know if you had any of that on your farm.
Yes, sir.
So what did they gauge your success of being in compliance there?
Well, we've always kept some cover on the soil. I mean, we started using cover crops and got out of conventional tillage in the late 90s, and then kind of had a 15-year, 20-year span in there where we just went with a single species cover crop until 6 years ago when we started ratcheting everything up. But I mean, keeping something on that surface and keeping it covered is really going to help with slowing down erosion. And keeping it covered is one part of it, but keeping a living root in it is what's really going to help to hold that soil there and keep it from washing and help with erosion.
You know, in our CS says you have to have, what, 30 or 40% residue? What's
Yes,
your
sir.
thoughts on that? Is that enough, or?
I don't think 30 is enough. I mean, we've gone a full season and we're probably still above 30% with our residue that's left in between these rows.
Okay.
So, you know, I'd like to see more left than what's here, but it's just decomposing too fast for us.
Okay. Well, decompose. That's one of the key indicators. Earlier in my career, I used to brag about how residue would stick around for a long time. Let me grab some of this. Kind of look at this right here. You know how easily it crumbles up. You know, residue is not meant to be there forever.
No, and I mean, we've got a little bit of last year's soybean crop that's still left right there. And then we've got a couple, you know, we've got a little bit of our rye and a little bit of triticale that's left. But all the rest of that, as far as the clover, the vetch, the oats that we had in there, all of that's gone.
So why is that? Why is it gone?
Well, it's been decomposed by
Okay.
our biology and it's been
Okay.
cycled back into the soil.
So these grasses tend to have a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, so they break down slower.
Yes, sir.
And they got lignin in them, that makes them more resistant to that. So do you try and balance that carbon to nitrogen ratio?
We try to balance it through using the blend, and that's one of the things that we look at to help with a carbon penalty, or as far as a nitrogen penalty from our carbon to nitrogen ratio when we come in. The legumes that we've got in the mix, the clover, the vetch, when we terminate them after we plant, they'll be gone in 30 to 45 days. The oats will be the next thing to break down. They have a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio than the rye. And then, so at the end of the year, basically, our residue that's still hanging around is that rye and triticale.
Okay. So, but again, a key point here, if you can get a year out of this, you're doing pretty good, and that's a good thing because that means your soil is biologically active.
Yes, sir.
So farmers, I know you hear about, especially in the corn belt, they talk about corn not being breaking down and that type of thing. Well, it's probably because your soil is not very biologically active, and it's not supposed to be there for 2 or 3 years. If it is, that's another good key indicator. Another indicator is, and we'll look at this a little closer, this is pretty shredded up. So we'll get down our hands and knees in a second, see if we can see any microbes or macro arthropods, some pill bugs and those types of things to help break this down. So residue should look like it's been run through a Vegematic or something, where it's sliced and diced in big, long, smaller pieces, and that's good. You're going from a big, long piece to fine pieces, and it takes the biology to break that down. And the other thing you'll notice here is how friable and pliable this is. This is really nice. You'd work awful hard, and we'll look at this seed bed here in a second, with a tillage tool to create that kind of a seed bed. So again, residue is important. We need to have a lot of residue. Most farmers that are doing what you're doing, Zeb, I don't hear them talk much about erosion because they've got so much residue on the surface. It intercepts the raindrop, and we all know that. But we're really looking at residue from the perspective that it feeds that biology, it protects the soil surface, and it's just an intricate part. You know, I think the word, we like to coin a new phrase called the detritus sphere, you know, that interaction between where the residue and the soil surface is.
Well,
So,
and it's all a system. It's the cover crops, feeding the soil, feeding the biology, and all of that going back into helping maintain a healthy acre of land for us. You know, it goes back to the soil food web.
exactly, which is most people don't understand. Let me hear a farmer's perspective of the soil food web. Put you on the spot there.
Well, my perspective of the soil food web is it's basically driven by sunlight, moisture, and a living plant. And from there, you know, we go into photosynthesis. We've got the plant that's providing carbon for everything that's in the soil, and carbon basically drives the entire process. From the time this plant puts carbon out into the soil through root exudates and then through the decaying of this matter, the whole food web, the whole soil food web is just a carbon cycle. And that kind of feeds everything that goes on, from the erosion control to the weed suppression, and everything that we talk about with the benefits of cover crop is all there due to that soil food web.
There you go. And what's something we can, I think one of the things we're seeing is we never thought we could manage that food web. You can do it on a garden plot, but you can't do it in a 50-acre cotton field. So one other question before we move on to the next evaluation. Cotton stalks, do they give you any trouble? I mean, the cotton is a perennial, right? So you think that the stalk would stick around and give you some issues in the spring? Has that ever been a problem, or what do you do to address that?
We started playing around with it, I guess it's been 4 years ago or so. We'll come in, harvest this cotton. Once we come in and harvest it, we'll come straight in behind it with a grain drill or whatever we're going to use to plant our cover. And we will establish that cover and plant it straight into our standing cotton stalks. We don't mow, you know, we don't do anything with those cotton stalks. We leave it here. It's a nice trellis for the covers to grow on. And what we found is after they sit through our winters, you know, here in the northern part of North Carolina, they get a couple good freezes on these cotton stalks. They're really, really brittle. When we come back in the next year, they're sitting there in our cover. When we roll that cover down with the roller crimper, it sizes those cotton stalks, and we really don't have any problems.
You're ending up with a 6-7 inch.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I mean, by that time, they're fragile enough that when we come through, they just shatter. And it actually is a lot easier. For me, it eliminates a trip to come through and mow those cotton stalks. So I'm able to establish my cover crop, with the same pass that I would have used and the same trip through the field that I would have used to mow cotton stalks.
I hadn't really thought about that. So you're kind of a trade-off there.
Yes, sir.
I hadn't really thought about that. So